Dr. Duncan Webb.
Reduced. We considered it to be probably one of the most poor, unfounded pieces of legislation imaginable, and then the Minister managed to outdo herself by putting in an amendment paper, or requiring the Select Committee to incorporate amendments, which made it even worse. And I could not believe when I heard her on Radio New Zealand saying that she had a flood of emails into her office, asking her to change it, to make it so that it included previous strikes. So I asked her, I used the Official Information Act, and said, show me those emails, that flood of emails that you refer to on Radio New Zealand, what are they? And she sent me some emails to her office, which were obviously prompted by an email to her supporter base. And do you know how many emails were actually addressed to her? Three. There were three. There were a few to Paul Goldsmith, a few to other ACT Party members, but to her, the flood of emails that she relied on in putting in an amendment paper that makes this bill retrospective were three. And she had the gall, the audacity, to go on Radio New Zealand and say, I'm listening to a flood of public opinion in my office. I don't know what you'd call that, but I know what I'd call it. And this bill, and here's the other thing, actually the close of her speech said a lot, because the real thing she referred to, the real reason for this bill is the coalition agreement. That she went on the hustings, she said, we're going to bring back 3 strikes, just like they do. And that's what she's doing. I'll tell you the other reason why she's doing it. Yeah, exactly. There is no other reason. Because there is no evidence that this is better for victims. There is no evidence this is better for offenders. There is no evidence this is better for the justice system, and there is no evidence this is better for society. So what we have is a doctrinaire and dogmatic party, which has got the National Party, which doesn't really believe in this, to do its bidding. And yeah, you should be ashamed of yourself, because I can say that. Well, you take a point of order, Matt Ducey. If you don't like it, you take a point of order, because under that coalition agreement, your party is doing the bidding of the ACT Party across the board. Yep, that's right. Yep. You, for the baubles of office, this is the price, the baubles of your office, this is the price that New Zealand paid. And we sat through Select Committee, and we listened to a lot of thoughtful submissions. Submissions from the Children's Commissioner, submissions from the Law Society, submissions from the Auckland Law, the New Zealand Law Society and the Law Association, submissions from across civil society. And none of them thought that this was a good idea. And you know what? The most offensive thing about this is that we repealed the 3 strikes regime that was in before, and we wiped that slate clean. And so all of those people who did have a strike are currently, as it stands today, on 0 strikes. And under this regime, they will retrospectively have those strikes reinstated. Now, retrospectivity in some situations is pretty rugged, pretty problematic, and you look at it carefully. But in the criminal law, when people's liberty is at stake, to go backwards in time and say things which happened in the past. And it's in the Bill of Rights Act. The Bill of Rights Act says when you come to sentencing, if there are different sentences in time between when you committed the offence and previously, then you're entitled to the lower of those offences, and that is for good reason. And here's the other thing. All of those people out there who think that they're clean slated, that they have 0 strikes, what are we going to do to tell them that things have changed? That in fact, this bill is actually about, flawed as it is, this bill is about deterrence. This bill is about people knowing they're on strike 1 or 2 and altering their behaviour. So we better tell them that their strikes have been, reinvigorated, that they've been returned. What does the bill say about that? Nothing. So the so-called deterrence effect is 0, because they won't even know. I don't think they're watching, right? Yeah. And that is really, really offensive, because all of a sudden you're worsening people's position substantially. And it's not my theory, it's your theory. The theory that offenders take into account the consequences, the increased penalties that they might face. Now, if you believe in that theory, you would actually tell them the consequences just got worse. But they won't. But they won't do that. And that makes the whole bill incoherent. And so the other thing is this. This bill is a significant change to our sentencing structure. And the process, the bill itself, when it was introduced, was sent to the Select Committee in haste. We had a truncated process. And then here we are now, in urgency, before Christmas, late at night. We've got committee stage next. And I see the Minister's put an amendment paper, possibly more, I don't know, on the table because she hasn't yet got it right. And you know what? Maybe doing it right and following good procedure would be a good idea. But this government isn't interested in good procedure. It's not interested in getting things right. It's not interested in the New Zealand Bill of Rights Act. It's just interested in getting into office and actually making sure that it has the baubles of office. So there is a real, and of course, the other thing is this, if you look at the advice, the government's not actually interested, and I put this to the Secretary for Justice the other day, that this government has passed numerous acts to date which make the position of Māori worse off. And here we go again. The departmental, the regulatory impact statement again made it clear that this was not consistent with the Treaty of Waitangi, that it would have a disproportionate impact on Māori, and that it was not recommended. I mean, the Ministry of Justice thought this was a bad idea. But this government's not interested in that. It's not interested in evidence. It's just interested in dogma. And so, you know, the fact is, whilst I guess the only redeeming factor is that this bill isn't quite as bad as its predecessor. But the fact is that having a 2-year sentence as the triggering factor will be distortionary in and of itself. There's this fatuous section in the Act which says that a judge should not have recourse, should not take into account the fact that there will be a strike imposed, as if a judge can take something out of their mind. The bill's flawed, it has no evidence, it's retrospective, it breaches constitutional principle, and it's an ACT Party bill with a National Party covering. It's a shocker.
An interesting speech from Duncan Webb.
Yep, I mean, I was looking at the evidence brief for the Three Strikes law. It paints a pretty damning picture on the effectiveness of the regime and highlights the lack of studies that have been conducted. I'm going to quote them. Research in this area appears to be prone to political bias. To date, there have been no international meta-analysis or systemic reviews on whether or not the three-strike laws reduce crime. That's pretty damning. It's a bad bill. What more do I have to say?
One of my concerns towards the Three Strikes bill is, for example, when you've got people who say, how I put it, say they use, say for example, they use drugs such as cannabis, or they're growing it at home because they're in pain, and then once they're subject to the Three Strikes bill, that's where I have concerns, because if someone is growing cannabis for their personal use, and because they can't get access to pain medication, we are putting that person at the mercy of the Three Strikes law, if you know what I'm saying.
Yeah. Yeah, that's an interesting way of putting it, is that, you know, someone who is doing it over, you know, as something like pain relief to medically put themselves into a more manageable life position is, you know, facing the prison cell and the Three Strikes, and that they could go away for how many years is the maximum sentence for a cannabis conviction?
The Three Strikes legislation at the moment is more geared towards serious violent and sexual offences rather than drug abuse or potential drug abuse. So I don't think the current legislation is going to be applied to people who grow cannabis or smoke marijuana. But yeah, you do bring up interesting point. That's going to be slapped on top. You know, that's just an extra thing. You know, you got 3 strikes, you're in prison. Okay, now we get to add extra prison time because you also happen to be doing cannabis as well. So yeah, it does present an interesting issue.
Okay, let's see what